Hi there guys, it's Sam from Tantrum Kitesurf. Now, one of the first things you learn as working as a performance coach, whether you're teaching kite surfers to massively upgrade their performance, or working with CEOs to improve their focus and productivity at work, or whether it's just me working on myself trying to become a kick-ass kite surfer, there's one thing that's so important that if you ignore it, everything else is literally for nothing, or even worse, you end up doing harm rather than good. That one thing is the law of individual differences, as it's called in the world of personal training. Now, what this basically states is when it comes to any field of performance, fitness, exercise, mental performance, nutrition, whatever, you name it, supplementation, whatever, sleep, the list goes on and on and on, but literally anything that you can think of, you have to individualize it to the person you are working with. In this case, me on this quest, because what works for you almost certainly by default won't work for me. Why? Because we are biochemically, physiologically, physically very different people. So we need very different approaches. Now, for many people, this is a great little nugget of information to know, but it's totally inactionable. Okay, great. Well, that's fine. I've got to find what works for me. How the hell do I do this? Well, in the past, this has just been simply a case of trial and error. I'd take a client, we'd have an idea of what would probably work based on their history and what they were trying to achieve and their kind of individual lifestyle circumstances. But really, it came down to trial and error. Try this, try that, try this form of exercise, try this diet, try these supplements, try this sleep regime, try these lifestyle interventions, and see what happens. Then if it works, great. We tweak and do more of it. If it doesn't work, we stop and change and do something different. Not very scientific. So starting on this quest, I wanted to do something very different. And this is what I've been doing with clients of mine for a number of years now. And that is absolutely, from the very beginning, tailor what I am doing to my unique biology. Now, over the last few years, technology has come to a point where genetic testing has become a reality for all of us. It's very, very easy to send off a saliva sample to a company like 23andMe, get your DNA decoded and start digging in to your genome and start understanding how your genes are interacting with your lifestyle. The problem is, until recently, getting the data back from 23andMe, it was a minefield trying to then navigate the data and try and work out what to do. The results really weren't actionable. Now, there were several services around where you could take the raw data and plug it into these and get some information back, but I found them really difficult to interpret, often very, very scientific. You need to be some kind of medical doctor to understand them. And even then, taken to most medical doctors, they don't have a clue. You have to be really a genetics expert to understand them. Or they just weren't very actionable. It would tell you things like, you're more subject to get this disease or that disease, or you're going to perform better doing this. But they weren't really saying, well, you need to do this to change that. There was nothing that you could actually use in them. That was until a company called Self-Decode came along. And I want to show you now how I've used them to radically upgrade my performance for this next year for the quest that I'm on. This is basically where I start. Why? Simply because your genetic data is never going to change. It's there. It's what you're born with. So we can use it really, really well as a baseline, as opposed to something like, doing a biome test, a gut biome test. Well, your gut biome can change literally in a day or two. So, okay, it's great to know, but it's a snapshot. Whereas your DNA is with you for life. So when we can start tweaking our lifestyle around that, we can start to see big changes. Is it the be all and the end all? No, of course not. But it's a great starting point. And it's a starting point that we can start without trial and error because it's scientific fact. This is your DNA. So this is exactly where I started on this quest. When I first conceived of the idea of rebooting this quest again, I thought, right, well, the first thing I've got to do is get myself to a state where I'm actually able to do it. So the first place I went, to the doctors, got a blood draw. Results came back pretty disappointing. Basically, my dad has a type of anemia, a very rare form of anemia, and my blood was showing the same markers, the same sort of inoptimum markers, is that even a word? Inoptimum markers as he has as well. Now, the doctors didn't really know what to do. He's had this for years and years and years, and they're just going back and forth, not really getting anywhere. So I knew that was the service I was going to get from the same time from the doctors. Not knocking doctors, they just didn't know. So I took my DNA data, plugged it into selfdecode.com, got the results back, some very, very actionable data. Interestingly found out I had some really weird kind of mutations in my genome. Well, not weird, quite normal actually. Some more propensities to get certain types of illness, Alzheimer's for example. But it also gives you recommendations as to what to do to improve these problems in your genes or these mutations in your genes. So I used their recommendations, mixed it with a lot of what I knew as well, and what I knew would work in these circumstances given my genetic propensities. And I want to show you the results that I got. Here are the results when the first test that I went to see the doctor. So you can see I'm low in several markers here. I'm just going to highlight them on the screen for you here. And for those of you listening on the podcast, my total white blood count was low. My platelet count was low. My red blood cell count was low. My mean cell hemoglobin level was above the reference range. My neutrophil count was low. My basophil count was above the reference range. And some of these are quite far out of the reference range, so it's not just a case of being, 0.1 above or below. These are the results of the second time that I went. Now you can see all these markers have shifted back into the optimal level. Some of them have gone a bit too high because I went a bit too far on the recommendations, but they're all up where they're supposed to be. And again, for those of you listening on the podcast, pretty much everything now is absolutely in the optimal level. My red blood cell count is still a tiny bit low, but literally 0.08. And my mean cell hemoglobin level is a little bit high, 0.4 high. But realistically, everything there is well within optimum range. And that was just 4 weeks after following the recommendations in this self-decode report. And this provides a great baseline to get moving. Now, as I say, is it the be-all and the end-all? No. Why? Because your environment affects your genes. It's very important to realise when doing this, and this is where a lot of people go wrong and get really worried about genetic testing. Your genes do not determine your destiny. Just because you have a propensity to Alzheimer's or a predisposition to Alzheimer's like I have, a genetic predisposition, does not mean you will get Alzheimer's. What it means is if you live your life in a certain way, the likelihood of you getting Alzheimer's is much improved, much increased. Okay, so all you do is you take these recommendations. Okay, well, what lifestyle changes do I need to shift to lower my risk of getting that disease? And that's what you do. And that's what these reports tell you. They tell you exactly how to change your lifestyle, what you need to be, nutritional wise, exercise wise, supplementation wise, what you need to be doing to downgrade the expression of your genes. Because the way DNA works is really interesting. Because when they decoded the human genome, they realized that there's just not enough variation in the gene to account for all the billions and billions and billions of individuals we see. There's got to be something else going on. And what they realized was that actually your genes play a part, but there's this other thing called epigenetics, which basically is a bunch of proteins that bind to your DNA in specific ways. The way that they bind to your DNA changes the expression of your DNA. So it makes, it can switch on certain genes and switch off other genes. Now, what are these epigenetic factors affected by? Well, they're affected by your environment, by the food you eat, the exercise you do, how much light you get, people you hang around with, the work you do, how much sport you do, what thoughts you have. All these things and 1,000 others that we don't even know about combine to change the expression of your DNA. So this is why I say DNA is not your destiny. DNA gives you a great platform to start with, to then work out where you want your destiny to go, how you want your life to evolve, what genes you want to express and how to turn them on. And that's exactly what I did over those 4 weeks, and I actually have continued doing since then with huge, huge improvements, literally week on week. So what's this all got to do with kitesurfing, you say? Well, this is where I started on this quest, and this is where I will use as the base continuously as I go through the next year. Anytime I'm going to make a severe lifestyle change, which I'm sure there's going to be a fair few over this next year, I will go back first to my DNA and say, okay, how is this lifestyle change, given what we know today, how is this going to impact on, or how is this going to interact with my genetic makeup, with my genetic predispositions? And you can really start to tweak the way that you do an awful lot of things. For example, one of the reports in the self-decode is exercise. What type of exercise are you genetically built for? Well, I'm genetically built for power style exercises, which is great because, kitesurfing is a power sport. But it also means that I can tailor the way that I do exercise. So I'm not going to train to be an ultramarathon runner, for example, because it goes against my genome. Whereas doing something like HIIT training is probably going to be perfect for me because that's going to build power. So work on your strengths rather than your weaknesses. So you can tailor every single part of your lifestyle to what's going to work best on your genes. So rather than trying to fight against your genes, you can work with them to achieve results much faster. And that's exactly what I plan to do for the rest of this year. So I hope that's been useful to you guys. If you are interested, the best way to get started with this, if you haven't already got your genes sampled, get them done. You can do that with a company like 23andMe, or you can actually do it with Self-Decode themselves. If you can choose the Self-Decode one, I would go down that road because they offer an awful lot more markers than the 23andMe one. It's much better tailored for what we want to do. And then you simply plug those results into Self-Decode's platform. All the links are in the notes below this video or below this podcast, depending on where you're watching / listening to this. Selfdecode.com, that's really simple. Or if you want my help with this, come and join me on the NTX program. This is where I'll be working with you to massively improve your kitesurfing when you're off the water. The link is in the notes below, and I'd love to work with you to turn you into a kick-ass kitesurfer. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.